All right, how you doing? Chapter 3, Colossians, third in our series of skating over and trying to cover Colossians in 4 weeks. We're getting there, but I don't know. I thought I got a bit muddled last week, so I'm sorry if it all just came a little bit weird. But chapter 3 is brilliant. And if you haven't read Colossians chapter 3, go and read chapter 1, 2 and 3, then you're up to speed with it. Paul has basically spoken against people who are coming into the church in Colossae and saying to them, you should live this way, you should live this way. And Paul has basically said, no, you should live focused on Jesus, full stop. And then chapter 3, he goes into his challenge, and it's a really big challenge, and it's all about basically stopping living the way you were living and now living in this new way. And the first section of chapter 3, you will see that it's really clear that Paul was saying you used to live like this, but now you are living with Jesus in your life. So what does that look like? And he then challenges them. You lived like this, doing all these sinful things. Take this off, like physically taking a coat off. Remove it from yourself, get rid of it. But then put on this new one. Verses 8 to 9 are there being reflected in verses 12 to 14. 8 to 9 is the bad stuff that you used to do, that we used to do. We need to take that off and replace it with verses 12 to 14. And that is much for that church then, it is for us as church now. Those things that I sit and I read through that list, and I sit here and I can put ticks next to all these things that I do that are wrong. And I shouldn't be doing those. I should take those things off. So what do I do about it? Well, I go to the Lord with prayer. I'd really encourage you to read through those things in verse 8 and 9. And as you go through them, ask the Lord for forgiveness. Look at those. Which of those are issues in your life? And if they're not issues, then that is fantastic. But they are, I'm sure, for lots of us. But then not just beat yourself with these things that I do wrong, but go to verse 12 and 14 and ask that the Lord gives you those things and gives you them more and more and more in abundance so that we can show God's love outwardly. And then he ends it with verse 15, which talks about basically everything. We should do it for Christ. That's why we're doing it. We're not doing it so we can go, oh, I'm a better Christian than you. I've taken all these things off and put these things on. It's not for that reason. We're doing it for Christ, not to hold it over other people, not to say, aren't I better than you? But we should live our lives fully for Christ. And then he goes into verse 18 through to 22, which is contentious. Verse 18, wives, submit to your husbands. And then we don't read anymore. And then it then says, verse 19, husbands, love your wives. Now, is that contentious? Yes, it is. Because rightfully, we're being going, well, why should we submit to our husbands? And I think a lot of you know my views on this. It shouldn't be about a submission in a negative manner. It should be, I believe, a submission of love. But likewise, the husbands, you should submit in love to your wives as well. Marriage is a partnership. And that's how we look at it nowadays in 2020. But Paul was writing this to Romans in Colossae. And in that time and in that place, and I'm not now saying that this is irrelevant because I don't think it's totally relevant to nowadays, but I think it's good to have the viewpoint of where were they coming from this. And of course, this is my 20th century trying to get a viewpoint of it. Obviously not living there 2,000 years ago, but in a Roman household, the man was the master. The man was in charge. He was in charge over his wife and over his children and over his slaves. And what Paul is suggesting here is quite radical. Instead of ruling over your wife, you should treat her with love. And these are reflected in husbands and wives is a submission and a love. Parents and children is children you should obey, but parents you should encourage. It's not just a negative thing. Children, obey your parents. Well, why should you obey your parents? That's a good idea. Your parents probably know, are probably slightly wiser than you. So it's good to obey them to begin with. Obviously, when you get to adulthood, then that's fine. But Paul is trying to get a balance in relationships and a balance in power here. Instead of it being the Roman father in charge of the household, he's trying to bring balance, the submission and the love, the obeying and the encouraging of parents and children. And then the one that doesn't feel quite right, the slaves. And he doesn't say, free your slaves. He says, slaves, you should work hard for your masters. But masters, you should be fair to your slaves. And I think we need to remember that at this point, the letter is also going to Philemon. And if you go and read Philemon, you'll see Philemon is about a Roman man and his slave and the issues with them. So that letter was probably sent to Philemon at a similar time, written by Paul. So he may be shoving the slave bit in there just to give a nod to Philemon as a letter coming. I don't know. But it's about being different. And that is radically different in a Roman household. Radically different. The way the husband deals with his wife. Treat her with love. The way that fathers should encourage children. Not just children obey me because I say so. But you should obey me and I should be encouraging you to do that in the way I love and treat you. And slaves, you should work hard. But masters, you should be fair and treat them fairly. So what's the point I want you guys to go away with? Go back to verse 8 and 9 of verse 12 and 14. It's about taking off our old selves and putting on our new selves. And verse 15, doing everything for Christ, living our lives for Christ, speaking the way we speak for Christ, living our whole life fully for him. And that is my prayer for you, and that is my prayer for myself, that I continue to do that, and actually that I live for Christ more than I do currently. That Christ will be the lead in all elements of my life, not just those I allow him to be. So join us next week for session 4. Go and read chapter 4, and I'll see you next week. Keep well. Bye.